Have you ever sent a simple text, maybe bought something online, or just opened a web page without a second thought? We all do it, right? Every single day. And we just expect that data to arrive, be understood, and, well, stay private. But have you ever stopped to wonder about the incredibly complex, unseen layers of communication happening underneath all that simplicity? And what if those fundamental layers, the very foundations of our digital interactions, were subtly compromised? Today, we're diving deep into that very question. Cyber attacks are an ever-present evolving concern, a relentless tide against our digital lives. And understanding the intricate structure of how networks communicate is absolutely key to building robust defenses. It's like trying to protect a house without knowing where the doors and windows are.
Precisely. And to navigate this complex landscape, we often use foundational frameworks like the Open Systems Interconnection model, the OSI model. Think of it as a meticulously designed blueprint, maybe, with 7 distinct layers. Each handles specific crucial functions in network communication. It's incredibly useful for analyzing and categorizing cyber threats. Helps us pinpoint not just what an attack is, but exactly how and where it occurs within the network's architecture.
Okay. And our mission for this deep dive is to give you a comprehensive exploration of cyber attacks across that OSI model, with a special laser focus on the often underestimated presentation layer, that's layer 6. We're here to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge from our sources, giving you, our listener, a shortcut to being truly well-informed about this critical aspect of cybersecurity. We'll start with a lightning-fast tour of the foundational layers, just to get our bearings, and then we'll spend the bulk of our time uncovering the secrets of layer 6. We'll explore specific types of attacks, their devastating impact, and robust mitigation strategies, from the physical wires that carry your data all the way up to the software you interact with every day.
Right. And while attacks can, and definitely do, target any layer, the presentation layer is interesting. Despite its conceptual abstraction in modern networks, and often being overlooked in daily conversations, it plays a critical behind-the-scenes role in data transformation and, crucially, security. This makes it a lucrative and often hidden target for sophisticated attackers. We're going to show you exactly why that is and why its silent work is so vital to your digital security.
Okay, let's unpack this from the ground up, but like you said, at lightning speed.
Yeah.
Before we dive headfirst into our star player, layer 6, it's really helpful to quickly get our bearings and understand the entire landscape, the 7 layers of the OSI model. Think of it like a journey your data takes, step by digital step from one device to another. We'll do a quick conceptual tour of layers 1 through 5 just to set the stage, and then we'll zoom right in on layer 6.
Excellent idea. Understanding each layer's primary job helps us grasp where vulnerabilities can creep in. So from the bottom up, let's quickly skim the surface before we dive deep. Okay, at layer 1, the physical layer, we're talking about the rawest form of connection. The actual wires, fiber optics, Wi-Fi signals, and the hardware like network cards, switches, routers, that sort of thing. This layer is all about the physical transmission of bits, raw data. The biggest threats here involve literally tapping into the communication lines or maybe sniffing wireless signals to intercept that raw data. Imagine a spy putting a listening device directly on an old phone line, that kind of thing. This can lead to espionage or provide the initial data for something like a man-in-the-middle attack. MITM, mitigations often involve good old-fashioned physical security for infrastructure like locking server rooms and, crucially, relying on encryption at higher layers to make that intercepted raw data completely unreadable.
So someone could just be listening to the electrical signals on the wires, essentially. That sounds pretty old school, but I guess it's still a real risk.
It absolutely is, and it's a critical starting point for many, many attacks. Moving up, layer 2 is the data link layer. This layer ensures reliable data transfer between directly connected devices, so devices within the same local network. Think your home Wi-Fi or an office network. Here, the threats get a bit more sophisticated. Think MS spoofing, where an attacker pretends to be another device by faking their hardware address, or ARP spoofing, tricking devices into sending traffic to the wrong place, often setting up, again, a man-in-the-middle scenario right there on the local network. Good network segmentation using VLANs, port security on switches, those kinds of things help prevent these internal network tricks.
Okay, so if layer 1 is about the raw signal and layer 2 is about reliable delivery within a room, say, then layer 3 must be about getting things between rooms or even buildings or across the world.
Right. You've got it. Layer 3, the network layer, is the internet's traffic controller. This layer is all about routing data packets between different networks, using IP addresses, internet protocol addresses. It's how your email gets from your local Wi-Fi to a server halfway across the planet. Attackers here often focus on disrupting traffic or redirecting it maliciously. IP spoofing, where an attacker fakes their source IP address, is a really common tactic, often used in large-scale denial-of-service attacks, DOS attacks, like ping floods that just overwhelm a target with way too much traffic. Firewalls, access control lists, ACLs, and intrusion detection and prevention systems, IDPS, are the key defenses here.
Right. So this is where the big internet outages and website takedowns typically start. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. Then we have layer 4, the transport layer. This layer ensures reliable and efficient end-to-end delivery of data between applications, whether it's through the meticulous error-checked approach of TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, or the faster but less reliable UDP, User Datagram Protocol. Think of TCP as like a carefully packed, tracked, and signed delivery service. You know it got there. While UDP is more like sending a postcard quick, but no absolute guarantee of arrival or order. Common attacks here include SYN floods, overwhelming a server by initiating too many half-open TCP connections, again, leading to denial of service, or session hijacking, where an attacker takes over an existing communication session between applications. Robust firewalls and IDPS are crucial here, alongside strong session management techniques at the higher layers.
This layer feels like it's getting really close to the actual data itself, moving between specific applications on our devices.
It is, yes. And that leads us nicely to layer 5, the session layer. This layer is responsible for establishing, managing, and terminating communication sessions between applications. It handles things like synchronization, making sure if a connection drops, maybe it can be resumed correctly without starting all over. The biggest threats here again involve session hijacking, stealing session tokens or cookies to impersonate a logged-in user, very common web attack, or replay attacks where captured data, maybe authentication data, is retransmitted later to gain unauthorized access. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, is huge here, and secure randomized session tokens with short timeouts are paramount for protecting your logged-in status on websites and apps.
Okay, so we've covered the foundational layers, right? Getting our data physically connected, reliably sent locally, routed across networks, delivered between apps, and managed in sessions. But all of that is kind of useless if the message itself isn't understood at the other end, if it arrives as gibberish. And that's precisely where our focus today, the presentation layer, layer 6, steps in. Think of it as the ultimate language barrier breaker, maybe the silent interpreter in the UN booth, the universal adapter that makes our digital world understandable. But what happens when that interpreter starts whispering secrets or worse, deliberately garbling messages? Here's where it gets really interesting.
You've set the stage perfectly. The presentation layer, layer 6, is positioned right between the session layer, layer 5, and the application layer, layer 7. It acts as this crucial liaison. Its primary role, its main job, is to ensure that data exchange between applications on different systems is in a mutually understandable format. Without it, your computer might not be able to open a photo sent from a friend's phone or read a document created on a Mac if you're on Windows, even if it received all the raw bits perfectly from the lower layers.
Right, this idea of data translation and formatting is fundamental, isn't it? Because different systems use wildly different encoding methods, especially across various platforms, even within different software apps.
Absolutely. Layer 6 handles this critical conversion, acting like a universal translator for computers. For instance, it might convert data formats like ASCII, which is common on Unix-like systems, to something called EBCDIC, historically prevalent on big IBM mainframes, though that's less common now. Or, more commonly today, it manages character encoding. Making sure UTF-8 works correctly for international compatibility, so emojis or special characters like accents display correctly, regardless of where they were sent from. It's how a JPEG image from your friend or a PDF document from a colleague can be read and displayed correctly on your computer, even if they were created on entirely different operating systems or using different software versions. And beyond simple character sets, it also manages more complex things like abstract syntax notations. ASN.1 is a big one, used for network transmission, and protocols like external data representation, XDR, for data serialization and remote procedure calls. That's ensuring complex data structures are consistently understood between systems.
And it also makes your data smaller so it travels faster, right? Yeah. That's where compression comes in. It's like digitally squishing things down for efficiency.
Precisely. Compression and decompression are vital functions handled here at layer 6. The presentation layer reduces the size of data using algorithms like ZIP or GZIP before it's sent over the network. This significantly enhances transmission speed, which is crucial for conserving bandwidth, especially for multimedia files like large images or video streams. Think Netflix. And then, upon receipt, layer 6 decompresses that data, restoring it to its original state. So the application layer, Layer 7 can process it correctly. So this dual function of formatting and compressing means fewer bits have to travel, but those bits still need to be understood correctly at the destination.
And this is where privacy really comes into play. It's also responsible for encryption and decryption. This feels like the part that's most directly tied to our personal data security, keeping things secret.
Critically, yes. Layer 6 is the primary locus, the main place, where encryption and decryption happen conceptually within the OSI model. It adds encryption to outgoing data to maintain confidentiality during transmission, safeguarding it from prying eyes. Conversely, it removes that encryption from incoming data, making it readable for the application waiting at Layer 7. This is absolutely crucial for sensitive information, think passwords, financial data, personal messages, and also for ensuring compliance with stringent data privacy standards such as GDPR or HIPAA. Protocols like Transport Layer Security, or TLS, which we'll discuss in much more depth shortly, largely operate at this conceptual level. They safeguard the integrity and confidentiality of your data as it moves across networks. Layer 6 also handles things like syntax negotiation, making sure the sender and receiver agree on the data formats being used, and performs basic error checking related to that data formatting itself.
Okay, so if layer 6 is so important for things like encryption and formatting and compression, why isn't it talked about more often? You don't hear layer 6 breach in the headlines usually. I think you mentioned it as something to do with the difference between two competing network models, right? One theoretical, one practical, that dominate how we understand networks.
That's an excellent question, and it's precisely where a significant security oversight can occur in practice. It's a really key point. While the OSI model is this comprehensive protocol-independent framework that clearly segments network functions into these 7 distinct layers, the TCP/IP model, which is the de facto standard underpinning the entire internet we use every day it consolidates several of these layers into broader categories. And the consolidation in the TCP/IP model is quite profound for our discussion today. It features a single application layer, and this one layer combines the functionalities of the OSI's session layer, Layer 5, presentation layer, Layer 6, and application layer, Layer 7. So all the functions we just discussed, data formatting, compression, encryption, plus session management, plus the direct user-facing application logic, are all conceptually grouped into one, often monolithic, layer in this real-world model.
That makes a lot of sense. So to you, the listener, this really matters because this intellectual grouping, this consolidation, can inadvertently cause security professionals to miss granular vulnerabilities that exist specifically at the presentation layer. An attack exploiting a weakness in, say, data compression, which is fundamentally a Layer 6 function, might get miscategorized as just a general Layer 7 application layer problem. It's why a conceptual return to the precision of the OSI model is so essential for a deep dive into security like this. It provides the clarity to isolate and analyze these specific, often subtle threats. The deepest insight from Layer 6, perhaps, is this paradox. By becoming virtually invisible within the dominant TCP/IP model, its vulnerabilities kind of became a hidden goldmine for attackers. It reminds us that sometimes what you don't explicitly see in your architecture is actually the most dangerous part.
Exactly. And furthermore, the role of these presentation layer functions has dramatically evolved over time. From being perhaps a secondary concern in earlier network designs, they've become primary and, frankly, mandatory, especially given the ubiquitous use of encryption in modern web traffic. HTTPS everywhere, right?
Yeah.
This shift makes Layer 6 a much more critical and thus more lucrative target for sophisticated attackers than it might appear at first glance when you're just looking at the TCP/IP model.
Okay, so if Layer 6 handles all this critical encryption, conceptually at least, what's the actual technology that does it? What's the name of that digital shield that protects our data as it travels across the internet?
Right. In modern network communications, the critical functions of the presentation layer, especially encryption and data integrity, are predominantly implemented by the Transport Layer Security, or TLS, protocol.
All right.
And of course, its predecessor, Secure Sockets Layer, or SSL, though SSL is largely deprecated now due to security issues. TLS is the absolute de facto standard for securing internet communications. It provides confidentiality, keeping things secret, integrity, making sure nothing's changed, and authentication, verifying who you're talking to. Essentially, the security of Layer 6, as we think about it today, is inextricably linked to the robustness and correct implementation of TLS.
Okay, TLS. So imagine two devices trying to have a private, secure conversation in a crowded, potentially hostile room like the internet. The TLS handshake is how they whisper the secret code to each other without anyone else hearing, right?
ensuring their privacy before the real conversation even begins.
That's a perfect analogy. The TLS handshake is a foundational process. It initiates every secure communication session online. It's a series of messages exchanged between a client, like your web browser, and a server, like the website you're visiting. They use this handshake to agree on cryptographic parameters, the rules of their secret conversation, and securely exchange keys to set up that secure channel. It's essentially a meticulous, multi-step introduction before the actual sensitive conversation begins. It all kicks off with the client for no way. Hello, your browser sends a message to the server. It says basically, hello, here's a list of all the TLS versions I support. Here are the cipher suites I can use. Think of these as different encryption recipes, and here's a unique random number I just generated. This tells the server what your browser is capable of, security-wise. The server then responds with a server hello. It looks at your browser's list, chooses the strongest TLS version and cipher suite that both sides support, sends its SSL certificate, which is its digital identity card, proving who it is, and it sends its own unique random number back. Next comes server authentication, and this step is absolutely crucial for preventing those man-in-the-middle attacks we mentioned. Your browser takes the server's SSL certificate and validates its identity. It checks the digital signature on that certificate against a list of trusted certificate authorities, or CAs, that your browser already knows and trusts. Companies like Let's Encrypt, DigiCert, etc. If the certificate is valid and issued by a trusted CA, your browser knows it's talking to the legitimate server and not an imposter pretending to be that server. It's like checking someone's government-issued ID before you trust them with a secret. Following authentication, we have the key exchange. Both the client and server use the public key from the server certificate, which was inside that certificate we just validated, to securely generate a shared secret. This is called the pre-master secret. They use asymmetric cryptography, public-private key stuff for this part. This is a critical moment because it establishes a secure encrypted channel for the very first time during the handshake, allowing them to share the secret safely. Finally, both sides use that pre-master secret, combined with the two random numbers they exchanged earlier, client random and server random, to compute something called the master secret. From this master secret, they then derive temporary symmetric session keys specifically for that single communication session. All subsequent bulk data, the actual conversation you're having with the server, like the web page content or your login details, is then encrypted and decrypted using these much faster symmetric session keys. This makes the ongoing communication efficient and secure. And it's really important to note the evolution here. Older TLS versions, like 1.0, 1.1, and even 1.2 to some extent, had more complex handshakes, multiple round trips back and forth. They also supported a much wider range of cipher suites, some of which turned out to be weak. This created a larger attack surface that exploiters could and did leverage. TLS 1.3, the latest standard, drastically simplified this process. It reduced the handshake typically to a single round trip and deprecated many weak or problematic cipher suites by design. This design shift fundamentally hardens the protocol against many historical vulnerabilities by simply removing the older, weaker options. It's much more streamlined and secure.
Okay, so a cipher suite sounds like a fancy hotel room, maybe, but it's really just a set of rules, isn't it? A specific cryptographic recipe for how all this encryption actually happens during the session.
That's an excellent way to put it. It's essentially a recipe for a secure session, agreed upon during the handshake. A cipher suite is a collection of cryptographic algorithms that defines exactly how a TLS connection will be established and maintained. If the client and server can't find a common cipher suite they both support and trust, the connection simply fails. They can't agree on the recipe, so no secure conversation happens. It's a very particular combination of ingredients, chosen from the list exchanged in the hello messages. Each cipher suite typically has three main components or ingredients in the recipe. First, there's the key exchange algorithm. This is responsible for securely exchanging or agreeing upon the key that will be used for the bulk encryption of your data later. Examples include algorithms like Diffie-Hellman, DH, or more commonly now, elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman ephemeral. ECDHU. Second, we have the bulk encryption algorithm. This is the symmetric algorithm that actually encrypts the payload data, your actual messages, web page content, financial info, etc. Algorithms like AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, often with 128 or 256-bit keys, or CHA-200, are commonly used here. This directly determines the strength of the confidentiality. And third, there's the Message Authentication Code, or MAC algorithm. This provides data integrity checks. It ensures that the data hasn't been altered or tampered with while it was in transit. Algorithms based on cryptographic hashes like SHA-256 or SHA-384 are used for this. Now, the TLS 1.3 revolution version significantly streamlined this, as I mentioned. Older TLS versions, particularly 1.2, supported a huge number of cipher suites. I think the spec listed 37 different standardized ones for 1.2. This was largely for backward compatibility with older systems, but it meant supporting many weak or deprecated algorithms that attackers could target in those downgrade attacks we'll talk about. TLS 1.3 fundamentally changed this. It reduced the number of supported suites to just 5 inherently secure options, all using modern, robust algorithms. This was a deliberate and profound shift towards a secure by default design. It makes it much harder for attackers to force a connection into using weaker encryption.
So we have these temporary session keys for each conversation generated using the cipher switch algorithms. How are they managed, and why is that particular management so important for security? It sounds like if someone gets their hands on even one session key, the whole conversation for that session is exposed.
The secure management of cryptographic keys is absolutely paramount to presentation layer security. It's maybe the most critical part after choosing strong algorithms. The TLS protocol ingeniously uses that dual key approach we talked about. Asymmetric crypto, public-private keys, for the initial handshake authentication. And then it switches to symmetric session keys for the bulk data transfer. And that switch is deliberate because symmetric encryption is far, far faster for encrypting large amounts of data compared to asymmetric. Now, the crucial point here is that these session keys are ephemeral. That means they are temporary, one-time use keys generated for each specific communication session. This dramatically minimizes risk. Even if an attacker were somehow able to compromise a single session key, maybe through some future vulnerability or immense computing power, they would only expose the traffic from that specific session. All future communications, even between the same client and server moments later, would use a newly generated different session key. This ensures that any compromise is contained just to that session. It's like changing the lock on your door every time you enter and leave, rather than using the same key for weeks or months. This property is often called perfect forward secrecy, or PFS, and it's a powerful defense. Now, for organizations with the highest security requirements, think banks, governments, critical infrastructure, the master keys, the long-term private keys used by the server, the one in its certificate that starts the key exchange, need extra protection. These are often protected by hardware security modules, or HSMs. These are dedicated, tamper-resistant physical devices. Their whole job is to securely store, manage, and use cryptographic keys. They provide FIPS-certified protection, maybe FIPS 142 or 143. Crucially, they ensure that these critical private keys are never exposed in software or to the potentially compromised host operating system. The cryptographic operations happen inside the secure hardware boundary. Some advanced HSMs even feature a capability called code safe or similar, which allows sensitive cryptographic logic or code to execute within the secure boundary of the module itself. This provides an extra layer of defense against sophisticated host OS exploits that might try to trick the HSM. It's like having a secure vault within a vault for your most precious secrets.
Okay, and we mentioned digital certificates during the handshake. These are like your passport for the internet verifying who you were talking to. Is that the right way to think about them?
Precisely. SSL/TLS certificates are the cornerstone of the public key infrastructure, PKI, that underlies much of internet security. They are a vital component of presentation layer security. They securely bind a public key to an entity like a website domain name, e.g. www.example.com, or an organization, and are essential for server authentication. During the TLS handshake, the server presents its certificate. Your client, your browser, for example, verifies the digital signature on that certificate, which must have been issued by a trusted certificate authority, or CA. This verification process relies on what we call the chain of trust. It's fundamental. Your browser and operating system maintain a list of trusted root CAs. These are globally recognized, highly audited organizations. When your browser receives a server certificate, it checks the signature. That signature was made by an intermediate CA. It then checks the signature on the intermediate CA certificate, which was signed by the root CA. It traces the signature back through a chain, potentially several steps long, all the way to one of the root CAs stored in its trusted list. If that chain is mathematically valid and ends at a trusted root, your browser can be confident that it's connecting to the legitimate server associated with that domain name and not an imposter. This is a fundamental defense against man-in-the-middle attacks, as it confirms the identity of the server you're trying to communicate with. Now, there's a more advanced control, the one that needs to be used with extreme caution, called public key pinning or certificate pinning. This involves embedding a specific public key, or maybe the hash of a certificate, or even the entire certificate, directly into a client application during its development, like in a mobile app. The idea is that the application will only trust that predefined key or certificate. If it connects to the server and gets a different certificate, even if that certificate is perfectly valid and signed by a trusted CA, the application will reject the connection. Conceptually, this is powerful against scenarios where a certificate authority itself might be compromised or tricked into issuing a fraudulent certificate for your domain. But, and this is a big but, it comes with a significant paradox. Organizations like OPAS now generally advise against pinning for most general-purpose applications. Why? Because of the extremely high risk of causing service outages. If the legitimate server certificate expires or needs to be rotated, which happens regularly, and the client application hasn't been updated with the new pinned key, the application will simply stop working. Users get locked out.
Ah, so it makes things brittle.
Exactly. It's very brittle. Imagine if your house key only worked for a specific lock that changed every year, and you didn't get the new key in time, you'd be locked out. It's a prime example of how a technically powerful security control isn't always the most practical or resilient solution in the real world, especially with advancements like certificate transparency logs now available, which help detect misissued certificates publicly without needing this rigid client-side pinning. Pinning is maybe best reserved for very specific controlled environments like internal APIs.
Okay, so even with all these robust security measures like TLS, modern cipher suites, certificate chains, attackers are constantly finding ways to exploit weaknesses. It really does feel like a never-ending game of cat and mouse. Here's where we get into the nitty-gritty, the specifics of how they try to break through the presentation layer.
It absolutely is a constant race. And you're right, despite robust designs like TLS 1.3, Layer 6 has been and continues to be a frequent target. The exploits often target implementation flaws, bugs in the code, like Heartbleed, or configuration weaknesses servers supporting old protocols. Or sometimes they exploit backward-compatible mechanisms designed for older clients. They rarely break the core cryptographic algorithms themselves. That's usually too hard. Many of these attacks are variations of the man-in-the-middle threat, which often serves as a gateway to higher-level data exfiltration or system compromise. Man-in-the-middle, or MITM, attacks are foundational here, as we've touched on. This is the classic spy movie scenario, right? Someone secretly inserts themselves into a communication channel between two parties. They sit in the middle. Their goal is to eavesdrop, alter, or manipulate the data flowing between the two legitimate parties without either of them knowing they're there. TLS is designed as the primary defense against this, using strong encryption to prevent eavesdropping and server authentication via certificates to prevent impersonation. However, attackers employ various circumvention techniques. These can include things like SSL hijacking, where they try to intercept and control the entire encrypted data stream, perhaps by tricking a user into installing a malicious root certificate, or DNS spoofing, where they corrupt the domain name system records to redirect your browser to a malicious server that looks like the legitimate one, maybe even has a seemingly valid but fraudulently obtained certificate. A successful MITM attack is often a prerequisite for launching more sophisticated Layer 6 attacks because it gives the attacker the position needed to manipulate the secure channel negotiation itself.
Right. And one way they manipulate it is by forcing it backwards. And it sounds incredibly sneaky, like making a system use an older, weaker version of a security protocol, almost coercing it back to an insecure state it should have abandoned years ago.
It is insidious, yes. This is known as a protocol downgrade attack. This type of MITM exploit tricks a client and server into using an older, less secure protocol, like SSL 3.0 instead of TLS 1.3, or maybe a weaker algorithm within a protocol for a connection that would normally use a modern, secure standard. It weaponizes backward compatibility, a feature often included, sometimes unfortunately, to support very old legacy systems that haven't been updated. A canonical famous example is the POODLE vulnerability. That stands for Padding Oracle and Downgraded Legacy Encryption. Its identifier is CVE 2014-3566, discovered back in 2014. This was a padding Oracle exploit specifically targeting SSL 3.0, the very old predecessor to TLS. An attacker in a man-in-the-middle position could intercept the initial handshake negotiation. If both the client and server still supported SSL 3.0 as a fallback, the attacker could interfere with the handshake attempts for TLS, causing them to fail repeatedly. Eventually, some browsers and servers would fall back and agree to try the ancient SSL 3.0. This is a compatibility dance being exploited. Once the connection was downgraded to SSL 3.0, the attacker could exploit a weakness in its design related to block cipher padding. This allowed them to decrypt parts of the encrypted traffic, typically recovering 1 byte of plain text for every 256 requests sent. This sounds slow, but it was enough to gradually decrypt sensitive information like session cookies, 1 character at a time, eventually allowing the attacker to hijack the user's session. The crucial lesson from POODLE: Backward compatibility, if not managed with extreme care, can be a critical security flaw. The primary mitigation is simple. Completely disable SSL 3.0 on all servers and clients. For any necessary compatibility with slightly older TLS versions, use a mechanism called TLS Fallback SCSV, which prevents malicious downgrades below the highest mutually supported version. And then we have the freak and logjam attacks a bit later. These were other significant downgrade exploits, but they targeted the key exchange process itself rather than the bulk encryption like POODLE. They exploited historical weaknesses in SSL TLS protocols that stem from, believe it or not, old U.S. government export regulations from the 1990s. These regulations bizarrely limited the strength of encryption that could be exported. This led to the creation of weakened export-grade cipher suites, limited to using very weak 512-bit RSA keys for the key exchange. These keys could be easily cracked by modern computers, even academic researchers back in 2015. The freak attack, factoring RSA export keys, tricked clients into agreeing to use these weak export-grade RSA cipher suites even if the server didn't intend to offer them normally. This allowed the MITM attacker to factor the server's temporary 512-bit RSA key and decrypt the session. The logjam attack was similar, but targeted the Diffie-Hellman DH key exchange. It forced connections to use weak common 512-bit DH groups, which could potentially be pre-calculated and broken relatively quickly by well-resourced attackers, like state actors. Both attacks allowed attackers to gain access to supposedly secure data by essentially forcing the secure channel negotiation into using these incredibly weak legacy export-grade parameters. The mitigation: disable all DH export and RS export cipher suites. Ensure servers are configured to use strong, unique, modern Diffie-Hellman parameters, at least 2048-bit, or, better yet, prefer elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, ECDHE, which avoids these issues.
Wait, even compression can be a vulnerability. That seems entirely counterintuitive. We compress data to make it faster and use less bandwidth, not weaker. How could that possibly leak secrets?
It's a very clever type of side channel attack, and you're right, it feels counterintuitive because compression is meant purely as an optimization. These exploits, known collectively as compression-based exploits, with famous examples being crime and breach, leverage data compression to extract sensitive information. They do this by analyzing the size of the encrypted compressed data. The fundamental principle is this: compression algorithms work by finding and eliminating redundancy. So if an attacker can inject data they control into the same stream as a secret, like a session cookie hidden in an HTTP header, and their injected data matches part of the secret, then the compressed data will become slightly smaller because the compression algorithm found redundancy. Attackers exploit this tiny difference in size. They systematically inject guesses for the secret, one character or byte at a time. When they guess correctly, the resulting encrypted response from the server will be slightly smaller. They observe this size difference and learn the secret piece by piece. The crime attack, compression ratio info leak made easy, specifically targeted compression features within the TLS protocol itself, TLS compression. It was effective at stealing things like session cookies sent in headers. Thankfully, TLS compression is rarely used now and widely disabled. But the more powerful breach attack, browser reconnaissance and exfiltration via adaptive compression of hypertext, exploits HTTP compression. Things like gzip or deflate, which operate at the application layer, layer 7, after TLS has decrypted the data but before it's sent back to the browser. This is more significant because HTTP compression is still very widely used for performance reasons, and it's much harder to disable completely without major impacts on website speed. Breach works similarly. An attacker injects data into an HTTP request, often via cross-site scripting or being on the same network, and then carefully analyzes the length of the resulting compressed HTTP response from the server. A tiny variation in the response length indicates a successful guess of part of a secret contained within that response page, like an anti-CSRF token. Mitigations for breach are trickier. They include disabling HTTP compression where feasible, often not practical, adding random padding to responses to obscure the true length variations, rate-limiting requests to slow down the attacker's guessing game significantly, or separating secrets from user-controlled input within the HTTP response body.
Okay. Moving on from protocol flaws to implementation flaws. This one was a huge deal, wasn't it? A simple coding error, a tiny mistake in a widely used library that absolutely shook the entire internet. I'm talking about Heartbleed.
Absolutely devastating, yes. The Heartbleed vulnerability, its official identifier is CVE 2014-0160, was a severe security bug discovered in April 2014. It wasn't in the TLS protocol design itself, but in OpenSSL, which is a foundational open-source cryptographic software library used by countless internet servers, web servers, VPNs, email servers, everything. What made Heartbleed so catastrophic was that it was an implementation error, a simple programming bug in how certain versions of OpenSSL handled the TLS heartbeat extension. The heartbeat extension is a small feature designed to allow one side of a TLS connection to check if the other side is still alive and responsive without needing to renegotiate the entire secure session. It's essentially a ping or keep alive mechanism within the encrypted channel. The mechanism exploited by Heartbleed was brutally simple for attackers, making it incredibly effective and widespread. An attacker could send a maliciously crafted heartbeat request to a vulnerable server. In this request, they would claim they were sending a certain payload length, say 64 kilobytes, but they would actually send only a single byte of data, or even 0 bytes. Due to a missing bounds check, a fundamental programming error in the vulnerable OpenSSL code, the server would read the claimed length, 64 KB, allocate a buffer for the response, copy the tiny amount of data the attacker actually sent, example 1 byte, and then it would keep reading beyond the end of the attacker's tiny input, copying up to 64 kilobytes of whatever happened to be adjacent in its own memory into the response buffer. It would then encrypt this buffer and send it back to the attacker. So the attacker receives back their single byte, followed by up to 64 KB of the server's private memory contents. This memory dump could contain absolutely anything: the server's private cryptographic keys, the crown jewels, user passwords submitted recently, sensitive session tokens, credit card numbers, even the content of other users' encrypted communications that were currently in memory. It enabled direct compromise of a server's memory, allowing passive eavesdropping, active data theft, and even service impersonation if the private keys were stolen. Remediation for Heartbleed was a massive global fire drill. It was extensive and complex. It required not only patching the OpenSSL library immediately to a non-vulnerable version, 1.0.1G or later, but also treating the entire infrastructure as potentially compromised before the patch was applied. Organizations had to assume their private keys might have been stolen, so they had to generate new private keys, get new SSL certificates issued based on those new keys, and revoke the old certificates. And because user credentials might have been exposed in memory dumps, all user passwords had to be reset as well. It was a huge cleanup effort. Heartbleed was a stark, terrifying demonstration of how a flaw in a seemingly minor component of the cryptographic stack, a simple buffer overread bug, could have a devastating ripple effect, compromising the entire system and enabling direct application layer 7 data exfiltration, essentially by stealing the keys to the kingdom right out of the server's memory.
Wow. Yeah, I remember that. These aren't just theoretical vulnerabilities discussed in academic papers. They lead to real, damaging breaches that have affected millions, maybe billions of people. Let's look at some high-profile examples where Layer 6 security failures, whether in TLS, certificates, or related areas, had catastrophic consequences.
The consequences are indeed very real and often severe. Presentation layer vulnerabilities have played a role, either directly or as an exacerbating factor, in some of the most damaging data breaches in history. They often act as enablers for higher layer attacks. Consider the massive Equifax breach in 2017. While the initial entry point was primarily a software vulnerability in Apache Struts, a Layer 7 issue, the situation was profoundly exacerbated by a critical Layer 6 security management failure. Equifax had allowed over 300 SSL TLS certificates to expire, including one that was crucial for an internal network monitoring and intrusion detection system. This glaring oversight meant that for months, the security tool relying on that certificate couldn't inspect encrypted traffic. As a result, during the actual attack, they failed to detect the massive data exfiltration that was occurring over encrypted channels. The attackers moved gigabytes of data out undetected. The lesson here is crystal clear. Security requires continuous operational discipline. Robust management of cryptographic assets, keys, and certificates is absolutely essential. It's not a set-it-and-forget-it task. Even the strongest encryption is useless if the certificates managing it are expired, or if monitoring tools can't decrypt traffic to inspect it. Then there's the Heartland Payment Systems breach back in 2008. This was a major payment processor. In this case, attackers exploited weak SSL TLS configurations on Heartland's payment network. It's not entirely clear if it was weak ciphers, old protocols, or other flaws, but the Layer 6 protection wasn't strong enough. This vulnerability allowed the attackers to inject malware, likely via SQL injection initially, that could then sit on the network and intercept payment card data before it was strongly encrypted, or perhaps decrypt weakly protected traffic. The impact was enormous. Over 100 million credit card records were compromised. It directly demonstrates how a failure in foundational L6 protection, the lack of strong, properly configured encryption, can directly enable catastrophic higher-level data theft. More recently, the Capital One breach in 2019. Again, the primary cause was a misconfigured web application firewall, WAF, allowing a server-side request forgery, SSRF attack, often considered Layer 7. However, the way the SSRF attack exposed data involved interacting with the AWS metadata service, which relies on specific data formats and handling at the presentation layer level. The attacker could request temporary credentials this way. While complex, it relates to how data representation and handling allowed access to sensitive configuration and credentials. The impact. Around 100 million customer records exposed, it reinforces the critical need for meticulous input validation, secure configuration, and ensuring data is encrypted both at rest and in transit, with strong controls over how systems handle different data formats and requests. And let's not forget the SolarWinds attack in 2020. This was a highly sophisticated supply chain compromise where attackers inserted malicious code into SolarWinds Orion software updates. This malicious code, among other things, impacted cryptographic components and authentication mechanisms within the software. It allowed the attackers, once inside a victim network via the compromised update, to bypass authentication, generate rogue SAML tokens related to cryptographic signing at L6, L7, and access sensitive systems and data, including government networks. The lesson from SolarWinds is profound. The security of your presentation layer, and indeed your entire system, is only as strong as your weakest dependency, particularly when those dependencies involve critical cryptographic components or software build processes. Supply chain security is paramount. So, connecting the dots across these major incidents, we see a recurring theme. A vulnerability at a lower foundational layer like Layer 6, whether it's weak encryption, expired certificates, poor key management, or flawed handling of data formats, is often a crucial means to an end for a devastating higher-level attack. A protocol downgrade, for instance, can be used to break encryption. That might enable session cookie theft, which then leads to session hijacking, which ultimately grants the attacker unauthorized application Layer 7 access to steal data or disrupt systems. These attacks are rarely isolated to just one layer. They are often a chain reaction that begins with a fundamental weakness, a hidden crack in the foundation, often related to these presentation layer functions.
Wow. Okay, so what does this all mean for you, the listener? And how do organizations actually defend against these sophisticated attacks that target the presentation layer? It sounds like we need to be incredibly proactive, constantly vigilant.
You're absolutely right. Proactive is the key word. The hard lessons learned from a decade of these significant Layer 6 exploits have fundamentally shifted defensive strategy. The focus has moved away from just reactively patching bugs when they're found towards a proactive approach of hardening by design, building security in from the start. A truly secure presentation layer now requires a multifaceted, proactive approach. It spans meticulous server configuration, implementing advanced security controls, and maintaining robust management processes for keys and certificates.
So starting with the configuration, this is about choosing the right settings and protocols from the very beginning, isn't it? Like building a house with strong materials and proper locks from day one, not adding them later.
Absolutely. Secure server configuration is the absolute foundation of defense. It's the most critical and often the most straightforward place to start. The number one rule: immediately disable all outdated protocols and weak cipher suites. We saw with POODLE, Freak, and Logjam that maintaining support for insecure protocols like SSLv2, SSLv3, or weak export-grade ciphers, even just for backward compatibility, is a catastrophic risk. Current best practice dictates disabling all TLS versions prior to TLS 1.2. Ideally, organizations should strive to support only TLS 1.3, perhaps falling back to TLS 1.2 only if absolutely necessary for specific critical client compatibility that can't be updated. This directly addresses those insidious downgrade attacks. And beyond just the protocol versions, it's imperative to enforce a strict cipher suite policy. You must disable dangerous cipher suites, null ciphers, which offers zero encryption, anonymous ciphers, which provide no server authentication, opening the door to MITM, and especially those weak export ciphers exploited by Freak and Logjam. Any software using RC4, DES, 3DES, or ND5 should also be disabled. Instead, prioritize strong, modern cipher suites included in TLS 1.3 or the best ones from TLS 1.2 if needed. These typically use AES, preferably GCM mode, or CHOCH20 for encryption, SHA 256 or stronger for integrity, and ECDHE for key exchange to provide perfect forward secrecy. Tools from organizations like Mozilla and OWASP provide excellent secure configuration generators and guidelines. They help administrators select a robust set of ciphers that balances strong security with necessary client compatibility. This represents a critical secure by default paradigm shift. Start strong, don't allow weak options.
Okay, so get the basics right first. Disable the old stuff, enable the strong stuff. What are some of the more sophisticated tools and strategies in the Layer 6 Defense Toolkit, going beyond just configuring the protocols and ciphers?
What are the advanced maneuvers?
Right. Beyond the fundamental configuration, there are several advanced controls that can significantly harden the presentation layer. One very effective control is HTTP Strict Transport Security, or HSTS. This is a web security policy mechanism delivered via an HTTP response header. When a browser sees this header from a website, it makes a note. For the next X months, as specified in the header, only connect to this website using HTTPS. Even if the user later types HTTP or clicks an old HTTP link, the browser will automatically internally upgrade the connection to HTTPS before sending the request. HSTS is incredibly effective at preventing protocol downgrade attacks and SSL stripping attacks, where an MITM attacker tries to force the connection back to unencrypted HTTP. Once the browser knows about the HSTS policy, it simply refuses to connect insecurely to that domain. Many sites can even get preloaded into browsers' HSTS lists. Another powerful though complex control we touched on is certificate pinning or public key pinning. Just to recap, this involves embedding a specific public key or hash of a certificate directly into a client application, like a mobile app or maybe even specialized desktop software. When the application tries to connect to its designated server, it verifies that the certificate presented by the server matches one of its predefined pinned keys. If it doesn't match, the connection is immediately terminated, even if the certificate presented is otherwise perfectly valid and signed by a trusted certificate authority. This offers a robust defense against man-in-the-middle attacks that rely on compromised CAs or fraudulently issued certificates. However, as we discussed, and it bears repeating, this must be used with extreme caution. The OWASP pinning cheat sheet and numerous security experts strongly highlight the high operational risk of causing service outages if the legitimate PIN certificate isn't rotated correctly and promptly within the client application before the server certificate changes. This requires a significant commitment of resources, careful planning, and reliable app update mechanisms. The risk of accidentally locking out all your users is very real. Therefore, while technically strong, pinning is generally best suited for highly controlled environments. Think internal back-end API communications where both client and server are managed by the same team, or perhaps native mobile apps where the app update cycle can be tightly managed and certificate lifetimes are predictable. It's not typically recommended for general websites accessed by standard browsers anymore.
Right. And the Equifax breach really hammered home the point that if you can't manage your security assets, your certificates, your keys, you're in deep trouble. It's not just about having them, but actively managing their entire life cycle.
Precisely. Heartbleed and Equifax were brutal lessons. Even the strongest cryptography is rendered useless without robust, continuous key and certificate management. It's not a one-time setup. It's an ongoing, meticulous process. Best practices are crucial here. Use sufficiently strong private keys. The current minimum recommendation is 2048 bits for RSA keys. The longer is better. And ECDSA keys, like P256 or P384, are generally preferred now for efficiency and strength. Use modern, secure hashing algorithms like SHA-256 or stronger for certificate signing. Older algorithms like SHA-1 are completely deprecated and untrusted by modern browsers. The use of wildcard certificates like .example.com should also be carefully considered and limited in scope, as a compromise of a single wildcard key could affect multiple subdomains and services. For high-value applications, those hardware security modules, HSMs we mentioned, offer a crucial layer of defense for private keys. By ensuring keys are stored and managed in dedicated, tamper-resistant hardware, HSMs prevent them from ever being exposed in software or to a potentially compromised server's memory, a direct lesson learned from Heartbleed, where keys could be leaked from memory. And finally, organizations absolutely must implement meticulous processes, ideally automated systems, for certificate lifecycle management. This includes tracking all certificates, monitoring expiration dates proactively, and ensuring timely automated renewal and deployment. This automation is key to mitigating the very real human error factor that led to the Equifax oversight. You simply can't manage thousands of certificates manually anymore.
Yeah, automation seems key there. And given that the threat landscape is always changing, always evolving, security can't just be a one-time setup or configuration. It has to be constant, right? Always checking, always updating, always scanning.
Absolutely. A static security posture is an inherently insecure one in today's world. The Heartbleed bug was the ultimate example of the devastating consequences of using an unpatched cryptographic library. It's a foundational requirement. Keep all cryptographic libraries like OpenSSL, BoringSSL, LibreSSL, or the crypto libraries in Java, .NET, etc., patched to the latest stable versions. This is non-negotiable. Even a seemingly minor patch release might close a critical vulnerability. And beyond just patching the libraries, organizations must continuously test their server configurations. Don't just configure it once and assume it's still good a year later. There are excellent publicly available online tools like the SSL Labs server test from Qualys, CryptCheck, and Hardenized. These services will connect to your public-facing servers and perform a deep audit of their TLS configuration against current industry best practices. They'll flag when protocols like SSL v3, TLS 1.0, 1.1, outdated or insecure cipher suites, insufficient key sauces, missing security headers like HSTS, certificate chain issues, vulnerability to known attacks like POODLE or logjam, and much more. Using these tools regularly provides crucial visibility. This proactive and continuous approach to vulnerability scanning and configuration auditing is essential for identifying and remediating weaknesses before they can be exploited by an attacker. The shift from reacting to major breaches to proactively eliminating entire classes of vulnerabilities by design is a core lesson from the last decade of Layer 6 exploits. And in addition to those core strategies focused on TLS configuration and management, several other mitigation techniques, which we've gathered from our sources, are critical for a truly comprehensive presentation layer defense strategy. Input validation and sanitization at the application layer, L7, are crucial, but they help protect L6 too, by preventing format manipulation attacks, injection attacks like SQL XSS that might expose data meant to be protected by L6 encryption, and generally ensuring data integrity before it even gets processed or encrypted. Web application firewalls, WFs, like the open source mod security or commercial offerings, sit in front of web servers. They can inspect incoming traffic, often after TLS decryption, and block requests containing malformed data, known attack patterns, or violations of HTTP protocol standards, protecting both L7 and potentially catching attacks aimed at L6 handling. Intrusion detection and prevention systems, IDPS, or network intrusion detection systems, NIDS, monitor network traffic more broadly. They can look for anomalous formatting attempts, signs of MITM attacks, connections using weak band protocols or ciphers, or other signs of malicious activity related to L6 functions, and can alert administrators or take real-time action to block suspicious connections. We also need careful compression controls. Limit the use of compression where possible if secrets are involved, ensure you're using up-to-date, patched compression libraries, and consider mitigations like padding if using HTTP compression. Robust logging and monitoring is vital. Capture detailed logs of TLS handshakes, successes, failures, chosen protocol ciphers, certificate validation events, and decryption operations where relevant. Feed these logs into security information and event management SIEM tools like Splunk or Elo Case-Stack for analysis, correlation, and anomaly detection to spot attacks in progress. Regular vulnerability scanning using tools like Nessus or OpenVAS should be configured to specifically check for TLS, SSL configuration weaknesses, open ports related to insecure services, and known vulnerabilities in cryptographic components. Develop and maintain detailed incident response plans that include specific playbooks for handling suspected presentation layer attacks, like MITM, downgrade attacks, certificate compromises. This ensures a rapid, coordinated response for detection, containment, eradication, and recovery. And finally, never underestimate employee awareness and training. Educate users about the risks associated with clicking suspicious links, installing untrusted software or certificates, ignoring browser warnings, and promote secure online practices. Often the human element is the initial entry point for attacks that later target foundational layers like L6.
Okay, that's a comprehensive defense strategy. But just when we think we're getting a handle on current threats, deploying TLS 1.3, managing certificates, there's always something new looming on the horizon. And this one sounds like it's straight out of science fiction, but experts say it's very real: quantum computing. It promises computational power that could break the very encryption that Layer 6 relies on today.
It's a very real and frankly existential challenge to Layer 6 security as we know it, and one we absolutely must prepare for now, not when it arrives. While current classical computers, even the biggest supercomputers, are simply unable to break the mathematical problems underlying modern public key cryptography in any reasonable time frame, quantum computers, operating on the principles of quantum mechanics like superposition and entanglement, promise vastly superior processing power for certain types of problems. And unfortunately, breaking modern crypto is one of those problems. They could render today's most trusted encryption methods completely obsolete, effectively dismantling our presentation layer security for things like key exchange and digital signatures. The primary threat comes from Shor's algorithm. This is a theoretical quantum algorithm developed by Peter Shor back in 1994. It's proven mathematically that it can efficiently solve the specific mathematical problems underpinning virtually all the asymmetric public key encryption methods we rely on today. That includes factoring large numbers, which breaks RSA encryption, and computing discrete logarithms, which breaks Diffie-Hellman, DH, and elliptic curve cryptography, ECC. These are the algorithms used in the TLS handshake for key exchange and authentication via digital signatures. The implications are profound, almost terrifying. A sufficiently large, stable quantum computer running Shor's algorithm could break the encryption used in the TLS handshake. It could potentially derive a server's private key from its public key, or calculate the shared session key during a Diffie-Hellman exchange. This would completely compromise data confidentiality and authentication for any communication relying on these currently secure algorithms. All or previously secure conversations could become readable by anyone with such a quantum computer. And a particularly concerning aspect of this, as you alluded to, is the store now, decrypt later attack scenario. Adversaries, particularly well-resourced nation-states, could be intercepting and storing vast amounts of encrypted internet traffic today, even though they can't decrypt it now. They are banking on the likelihood that within, say, 10, 15, or 20 years, they will have access to powerful enough quantum computers. At that point, they can go back to their stored data archives and decrypt all that sensitive information collected years earlier. This means that data transmitted today, government secrets, corporate intellectual property, long-term financial data, private communications, which you believe to be securely encrypted with TLS, could be compromised years, even decades from now. This makes preparing for the post-quantum era an immediate priority, especially for data that needs to remain confidential for a long time. We can't wait until the threat is fully realized. Recognizing this impending threat, the global cryptographic community, led by organizations like the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, launched a multi-year open global competition several years ago. The goal was to develop and standardize new cryptographic algorithms, specifically public key algorithms that are secure against attacks from both classical computers and future quantum computers. This effort is known as the Post-Quantum Cryptography, PQC, standardization process. It's a massive undertaking involving researchers worldwide submitting candidate algorithms, subjecting them to intense public scrutiny and cryptanalysis, aiming to future-proof our digital communications. The focus has been primarily on replacements for public key, encryption key encapsulation, and digital signatures. And NIST has recently, in August 2024, finalized its first set of PQC standards after multiple rounds of evaluation. The primary standard selected for general encryption and key encapsulation, used to establish shared keys, like in TLS, is ML-KEM, Module Lattice-Based Key Encapsulation Mechanism. You might have heard of its predecessor during the competition, Crystal's Kyber. It's based on the difficulty of problems in mathematical lattices and is favored for its relatively small key sizes and good performance. For digital signatures used for authentication, like signing certificates or software, the primary standard is MLDSA, Module Lattice-Based Digital Signature Algorithm, formerly known as Crystal's dilithium, also lattice-based. Think of ML-KEM and MLDSA as the new quantum-resistant encryption and signature recipes that will eventually replace RSA, DH, ECC, and ECDSA in protocols like TLS, SSH, and digital certificates. Additionally, recognizing that we shouldn't put all our cryptographic eggs in one mathematical basket in case unforeseen weaknesses are found in lattices, NIST has also standardized backup algorithms based on different mathematical principles for resilience. For digital signatures, SLH-DSA, Stateless Hash-Based Digital Signature Algorithm, which is based on the SFINS Plus submission, is a backup standard. Hash-based signatures have different properties and rely only on the security of cryptographic hash functions. And HQC, Hamming quasi-cyclic, was selected as an additional KEM standard in draft for key encapsulation based on error-correcting codes, offering redundancy and a different mathematical foundation should any issues arise with the primary lattice-based KEM. Now, the migration to this new generation of quantum-resistant cryptography is not going to be like flipping a switch. It will be a long-term, complex, multi-phase journey, likely spanning the next decade or more. Organizations must begin planning and preparing now to avoid a future security crisis when large quantum computers become practical. This transition absolutely demands cryptographic agility. That means designing and building systems that can easily adapt to new cryptographic threats and standards. Systems need to be flexible enough to swap out algorithms, key sizes, and protocols without requiring a complete overhaul. This directly echoes the lessons learned from past downgrade attacks, like POODLE, where rigid legacy systems that couldn't easily disable older, insecure protocols were the most vulnerable. We need systems that can pivot and adapt smoothly to the PQC era. The migration involves several key steps, starting now. First, organizations need to conduct a thorough inventory of all their cryptographic assets every place they use public key cryptography, algorithms, keys, certificates, protocols, to understand their exposure and identify what is vulnerable to quantum attacks. This is often called a crypto inventory. Then they need to develop a strategic roadmap and plan for a phased rollout of post-quantum algorithms. This will likely involve a hybrid approach initially, especially for protocols like TLS. A hybrid approach might combine a traditional key exchange, like ECDHE, with a new quantum-resistant key exchange, like MLChem. The resulting session key would depend on both exchanges, ensuring security against both classical attackers and future quantum attackers, assuming one of the algorithms remains unbroken. Google's experiments with hybrid key exchange in Chrome and Boring SSL are examples of this approach being tested today. This provides backward compatibility while starting the transition.
Wow. So this means we're constantly in a race, not just against current attackers, but against future technological breakthroughs, always evolving our defenses, even against threats that don't fully exist in practice yet. It's quite remarkable how proactive cybersecurity has to be. So let's try and wrap this up. What have we truly learned from this deep dive into the presentation layer? We've journeyed through the intricate layers of the OSI model, with a real laser focus on the often understated but critically important layer 6. We've seen how its core functions, data translation, compression, and especially encryption via protocols like TLS, make it a prime target for attackers. A place where subtle vulnerabilities can have absolutely catastrophic consequences that ripple all the way up to our daily digital lives.
I think the key insights are compelling, yeah. First, perhaps the deepest insight from Layer 6 is that paradox we discussed. By becoming somewhat conceptually invisible within the dominant TCP/IP model, its specific functions and vulnerabilities became a hidden goldmine for attackers. It really reminds us that sometimes what you don't explicitly see or focus on in your architecture can be the most dangerous part. Understanding the OSI model's granularity remains crucial for deep security analysis. Second, protocols like TLS are absolutely our frontline defense at this layer, but their security relies entirely on correct implementation, meticulous configuration, and continuous management. We saw how seemingly minor flaws, a padding oracle in POODLE, a buffer overread in Heartbleed, an expired certificate in Equifax can lead to catastrophic data breaches. The details matter immensely. Finally, a proactive security design approach is indispensable. This includes enforcing strict configurations, disabling old protocol ciphers, using advanced controls like HSTS where appropriate, maintaining robust key and certificate lifecycle management, ideally automated, and practicing continuous vigilance through patching and scanning. This builds a resilient digital infrastructure against both current threats and future challenges, like the looming quantum revolution, which demands that cryptographic agility.
And why does this matter to you, our listener? Whether you're preparing for a meeting, maybe catching up on the field, or perhaps just insanely curious about how the internet works securely, understanding the presentation layer empowers you. It makes you realize that every single secure connection you make, every piece of sensitive data you send or receive online, relies fundamentally on these foundational layers working perfectly and constantly being descended. It's not just about protecting big corporations or governments. It's ultimately about protecting your own digital life, your privacy, your financial information, and the overall integrity of the information age itself. Layer 6, or at least the functions it represents via TLS, is the silent, unsung hero of your online world. And now hopefully you know a few more of its secrets and why it's so important to protect.
That's well put. And maybe a final thought to leave with you. The integrity of the presentation layer, the security of our encrypted communications is not a given. It's not guaranteed. It demands continuous vigilance, investment, and that cryptographic agility from everyone involved: developers, administrators, organizations, standards bodies, and even users. In an age of relentlessly escalating cyber threats and the undeniable reality of the looming quantum revolution, what responsibility do we all share in advocating for, demanding, and implementing stronger foundational security for our increasingly interconnected world? How might you, in your role or even just in your personal digital habits, contribute to building a more cryptographically agile and secure future? What choices can you make about the software, services, and security practices you use or support? Something to think about.